Hey folks, Jack here. I'm excited to bring you today's webinar on writing better blurbs, but I just wanted to make one note. At the end of this webinar, we do spend some time critiquing some of the blurbs and book descriptions of those who attended the webinar today via Zoom. We are intending to do more of these critiques and have them posted here on the YouTube channel as separate videos, which might be something we do on an ongoing basis. If you would like your blurb, book description, or tagline to be critiqued by myself and our author support team, feel free to leave it in the comments under this video, and we will reply here on the channel and include it in one of our upcoming blurb critique videos. So that's it. Without further ado, here's the webinar. We're talking about blurbs, right? We are also going to touch a little bit on, as I was saying, book descriptions and taglines. They're obviously related, but they're not the same thing. And so I want to kind of define terms a little bit here, so we're all on the same page. We all know what we're talking about. But then, so you also know like what each one is for, because they're really different tools. A blurb and a tagline, a description. If we had a Venn diagram, right, they would overlap a little bit in certain respects in terms of their purpose and their use, but they're all different and they're all useful in different ways. Before we do dive in here and we get to the slides, a couple things in regards to this webinar today. Once we get through all the slides and get through our discussion, I don't want to linger too long on it. Some of this stuff is definitely going to be things that you've heard before. Hopefully there's going to be some nuggets in here that are new for you, or maybe gives you a way to look at it in a different light. I've tried to provide some examples, some constructed examples. I didn't want to pull out some like famous book descriptions and blurbs from different authors who everybody knows, because I felt like on the one hand, it's not going to be helpful to everybody. If I pull out the blurb for, say, a fantasy book, that's not going to help the romance writers, and vice versa, because there's genre plays such a strong hand in this whole thing. And then to boot, sometimes, you know, when you look at really big authors, right? Really, like if you look at all the, pick any of the big names, right? In any genre, they're not always the best example. And I'm not trying to necessarily be cynical here, maybe a little bit. But if they've already got a huge audience, they're probably not really relying on their blurb or their book description to sell more books, right? You know, think of any famous author. The one who always comes to mind for me is like Brandon Sanderson. He probably doesn't have to rely on like his blurb and book description don't have to be exactly on point. I'm sure they're great. I'm sure there's a lot you could learn from them, but it's probably a little better for you to start by looking at your peers and then comparing yourself to them, and compare yourself to folks who you're kind of closer in comparison to. And that would take a lot of digging and research to do that for multiple genres. So instead of what I've done is I've created some constructed examples. They're fictitious, but they're intended to show you that, you know, that for these specific things, we're going to talk about how to implement them. But I do, at the end, when we get to the Q&A, I do want to take some time to look at some blurbs. So if you have your own blurb or book description and you'd like to have it critiqued live on Zoom in front of everybody, which might sound nerve-wracking to some, but if you'd like that, you know, feel free to at that point in time, you can drop it in the Zoom chat, and maybe we'll take a look at it, take a look at some folks' blurbs. If you want to, or take a look at your book description and maybe provide some feedback if that's what you like. Also, some big announcements. Obviously, today's webinar, you're here for that. We have another webinar next week that is a follow-up to one of our more popular recent webinars on your first Facebook ad. We're actually going to be diving into ad copy, writing ad copy for your Facebook ads. This is intended to be sort of a sequel to your first Facebook ad webinar we did last month. So looking forward to that. And yes, I paired that intentionally with blurbs. I think there's definitely some overlap. I'm not trying to make it easier for myself, but I do think they're related. So I think talking about blurbs and then going on to talking about ad copy, it really makes a lot of sense. So for those of you who are here for both of them, I think you'll get a lot of benefit out of that. If you got the bulletin today, you also should have seen that BookFunnel is going to be at Author Nation in Las Vegas. It's coming up here in like, what, 25 days, something like that, right around the corner. So if you are going to be there, you can come by and say hi. I myself will be there at the booth. Some of other members of our author support team will be there. We'll also be doing some one-on-one sessions that you can schedule. I think if you are attending and you have purchased tickets, you'll get access to a Calendly link where you can sign up for a one-on-one 20-minute one-on-one session with yours truly or another member of our author support team if you have some questions you need answered or you just need some help with your book funnel or whatever it happens to be. So, at the very least, if you just want to pop by and say hi, that would be great as well. We're also going to be doing a Q&A while we are in Vegas, a live BookFunnel Q&A on Wednesday, the normal webinar time. And so I'm trying to figure it out how we could do it where we might have like somewhat of a live audience. That would be cool. I don't know if we'll be able to pull that off because everything's I don't know all the details yet, how we'd figure that out, if we had a room that we could have access to or not. We'll have to see. But for those of you who are there in person, that might be fun. So we'll have to kind of be touch and go on that and figure out as we go along. But that's also coming up. Okay. So that's plenty there. I think we've gotten through all of the announcements. I've done my whole long intro here. It's about time we get to the meat and potatoes here of what we're actually going to be talking about. So first, we're going to define terms and talk about what a blurb is. I feel like it's important to start with that because a lot of people throw out the word blurb and maybe they're referring to a book description or just generically like what you see on the back of a paperback book. That's right. That's what a blurb is, right? So I want to define terms so we know we're on the same page when we're talking about blurbs versus book descriptions versus taglines. We kind of all are, again, on the same page. We're going to talk about how to make your blurbs engaging and some keys to an effective blurb. And then we're going to also talk about book descriptions and taglines. We're going to touch on each of those before we then talk about how you can test and improve your blurbs as well. Because once you've written them, it might look good to you. You can sit there and spend a whole lot of time crafting a blurb that you think is good, but is it actually effective? Is it actually going to do its job? Well, you have to actually test that if you want to find out. So, what is a blurb? Well, I want you to think of your blurb as an elevator pitch for your book, right? It needs to be short and sweet, and it should focus on trying to motivate readers to read your book. That is the purpose of a blurb. It is, right? Like if you had 10 seconds to explain to somebody what your book is about in the most compelling way possible, that is what your blurb is. The primary purpose, again, is to catch the reader's attention. It should tell them briefly what the book is about and then leave them curious so they want more. It's not there to answer all of their questions. It is there to generate curiosity and also catch their attention. That's the two jobs that it has. Right? A blurb is not a book description. A full book description is going to go into more detail on the plot, the characters, the other elements of your story. Certainly, you could make reference to elements of the plot or certain characters within the blurb. It's not that they can't be in the blurb. It's not that the blurb is agnostic to those things. It's just that that's not the primary focus of the blurb. The blurb is there to grab their attention, to generate curiosity, and I would say, to a certain extent, signaling genre as well. Right? If somebody could only read the blurb, imagine they can't see the book cover. How do they know what this book is about in just a short paragraph? So what makes a blurb engaging? Well, a few things here. You need to start off strong with a good hook. Your opening sentence should immediately grab their attention, right? We want to generate some intrigue, some surprise, some drama, whatever it happens to be, right? Create curiosity from the very first moment so that they are compelled to keep going, right? Oops. We still have some more people dropping in, so I'm letting them in here. You also need to be concise. I would recommend keeping your blurb under 200 words. That would be my recommendation. If it goes over a little bit, that's fine. But longer than that, and then we're kind of getting into different territory, right? If we're going much beyond 200 words, right? We want to focus really just on the main character, the primary conflict. What are the stakes? Again, think of it like a teaser. This isn't a full summary of your book, right? So any detail that is unnecessary, we want to leave out. We don't want to include anything that is unnecessary, right? If they read the book, they're going to figure all that stuff out, right? But what's necessary to get them to read the book? What are the compelling elements that will get them to actually read it? All that other stuff, they actually want that to be in the book instead, right? They want it to be there. They don't want it to be in the blurb, right? Thrown in their face. That's the mystery element of it that they want to figure out later. Keep the focus on the conflict, whatever it happens to be, and clearly convey what that is, right? What is at risk for your characters? And this doesn't matter what genre you write in. So if you write thrillers, right, the word conflict, risk, you can take those very literally, right? Probably in certain genres. But if you write romance, right, and there's no, maybe we're talking a totally different genre, there's still conflict, there's still risk. What's at stake for your characters? Even if it's not literally like their life is at risk, right? That sort of thing. When we're talking about those things, obviously, those are elements of a story, no matter what genre you're in. What is at stake? What do they have to lose? What do they have to gain? And this is what creates tension and gets them engaged and creates that curiosity that's, I'm going to pick up this book. I'm going to give it a try. Emotion and mystery. So the emotional tone of your story is another thing that you can convey here to get them connected, right? Excitement, fear, joy. What's the primary emotion that you want to have them feel? But at the same time, we don't want to reveal everything. We're not here to reveal the full plot. We want to give them a taste of it and leave them wanting more, right? If they know everything that there is to know about the book, if we tell them everything, why do they need to read the book, right? We have to leave some mystery when they get to the end of that blurb that's going to keep them going. So a few keys here, and I have with each of these, I have a constructed example. So the hook, right? We're kind of talking about like almost the anatomy of a blurb here. So the hook, you're grabbing their attention in the first sentence. So here I have an example. The world ended on a Wednesday, right? But for Aiden, it was just the beginning. Well, okay, that's one way that you could construct a hook. You're kind of, you really are throwing that first sentence at them, and it needs to be enough that it's at once it's kind of unsettling here. The world ended on a Wednesday. That's kind of a casual way to say that the apocalypse happened, right? That kind of abruptness is one example. It's not the only example, but of a good hook that it grabs their attention. It's stark. It jumps out at them, whatever that happens to be. All right, so the hook is first. Now we get to a conflict. We're introducing the stakes. We're generating tension here, right? So with a killer on the loose, right? In a sleepy town. We're also kind of showing the setting here, but this is very clearly here in just the first few sentences communicating a lot of things, right? A killer on the loose. Yeah, that I'd be pretty, scared about that. But we're also signaling genre here. Detective Emma Royce, must unravel a series of cryptic messages. I think you can tell what genre this book is, right? I think you can tell right away what it is and what is at stake for our character, right? And speaking of that, the characters, the human element. Right? This is typically what you want to introduce. Although in certain genres, it's not always necessary. There are exceptions to this that come to mind, but we want to have a brief but impactful character description. So Fiona Kane has always been the quiet one until the day she learns she can control fire with a thought. Right? Right there, we're learning something about the main character. Not a whole lot, just enough. Maybe something that we can even relate to in this character, and then something about them that again is relevant to the plot and to the story. The one genre where this isn't always necessary, and it's not necessarily the only one, but hard sci-fi sometimes doesn't need the character is sometimes actually takes a step back from the setting or something else that's really of primary importance in hard sci-fi. There's other genres where that also might be the case. And so in that case, in hard science fiction, sometimes the science is the character. I write science fiction myself, so this is why this example is coming up for me. But you might, in another genre, understand the same thing, right? If you're writing nonfiction, to kind of give a nod to our nonfiction authors here, right? The character, I would say, in most nonfiction is actually the reader. And so the stakes are theirs, right? The stakes are for them personally. And this is one strategy for nonfiction and writing a blurb or a description is to, in that blurb, make them the main character and talk about what's at stake for them and how this book can help them, right? You're still kind of telling a story, right? But focus on the character, whether that's actually a character or it's an idea, right? Whatever it might happen to be, right? Think of the movie Twister, right? I know there was a recent sequel that came out too. The Twister itself is a character in that story. You could argue, right? Uh, you could, depending on what your story is, the character doesn't necessarily have to be an actual literal person, right? Now we want to convey tone and genre. How does the book feel? Right? So in a world where magic is illegal, Jasper Moon makes a living as the city's best spellbreaker until a forbidden sorceress hires him for the job of a lifetime, and the price may be more than he can pay. Right? So we're seeing here, first of all, a genre. We're mentioning magic, spells, but we're also giving maybe some hints that there's maybe some dark elements going on here, a price that's more than he can pay. Right? Now, if this were dark fantasy, right? We would maybe want to do something a little bit stronger than that, right? But so you have to tread carefully here because you don't want to signal the wrong thing. If you signal the wrong thing, it's going to be confusing, and then your reader picks up the book and they were expecting one thing and they got another. And that's what leads to negative reviews sometimes. So you have to convey, it's not just genre, but it's also the tone, which I guess kind of speaks to subgenre, right? If we're talking about romance, there's lots of different subgenres of romance. Are you writing a sweet romance? What's the heat level of the romance you're writing, right? I think that blurb should very clearly indicate what it is. And you can see how if you fail to do that, you're going to wind up in a situation where somebody's going to be expecting something different and they crack the book open and it's not what they expected. Now, you should have a call to action, right? Or a call to adventure. So we're ending with something that makes the reader want more. It's not just like buy this book now, right? Kind of call to action, right? But I want you to look at the last sentence here of this example. Her next move will change the world forever, right? We're implying that the plot is moving forward. It's a call to adventure, to join in on what the story is, to read and find out what's coming next. That's how it's kind of the opposite of the hook. The hook grabs their attention, it gets them to pay attention, and then at the end, the call to action or call to adventure, however you want to phrase it, because call to action we use in marketing a lot. And so I don't want to confuse, right? It's not literally saying pick up the book and find out what happens next, right? It's should be within the same tone as the rest of the blurb, but hinting at what's coming next. It goes back to the kind of that mystery element, but a promise of what's coming, right? A promise of the plot is going to move forward and it's going to be impactful and influential. That's what you're communicating, right? And with that final call to adventure. So some common pitfalls I want to cover here, because we talked about, oh, this is great. Do all these things and it's engaging. So a couple things. You do not want to info dump. I think this is true of things other than just blurbs as well. It doesn't just apply to blurbs. You don't need to cram everything into your blurb. Avoid any and all unnecessary detail outside of the primary arc of your main character, right? So if, for example, you're writing a young adult fantasy series, maybe a coming of age series, we don't need to know the mentor character's backstory in the blurb. We don't really, other than maybe the mention of a villain, we probably don't need to know who the villain is or why they're so evil or what they did to the main character that hurt them or what have you. We don't really need to know that stuff. Or we can kind of set that all aside, and we want to, like, one of the big things, especially if you do write in a universe that you have crafted yourself, terminology, right? If you have locations and people and terms that you made up yourself, these are all new words to your readers they've never seen before in most cases, you're going to want to be careful not to dump too much of that into the blurb. I would say maybe keep it at one mention of some sort of fictitious made up element of your story at most, because any more than that and it's kind of becomes a word salad of stuff that they don't recognize, right? And stuff that doesn't seem familiar. And readers do kind of get a sense for your writing ability from your blurb as well. So don't think that they're not also thinking that when they're reading your blurb. If your blurb is clunky, they're going to assume that your writing is also clunky. And so you do have to really make a good first impression here. And so when we're talking about info dumping, if you're throwing too much at them all at once, I remember um, when I first started working with my literary editor, Harry DeWolf, this was one of the first things that we talked about. Now, this was when was this? This was over a decade ago. It's just a long time ago, right? I was young back then. And we talked about this info dumping. It was one of the first things we talked about, one of the first conversations that we had, because I had this made up universe and I was trying to cram everything in and make sure the reader knew everything. And even in the first chapter of the book, and I think that extends to your blurb as well. You have to leave breadcrumbs, leave a trail, and they'll figure it all out eventually, right? Even if you are writing a story that occurs in the real world with real places, right? You still have to do that sort of thing and not info dump all at once, right? Avoid cliche as much as you can. Generic phrasing that readers have heard time and time again, right? This doesn't make your book stand out, right? On a dark and stormy night, right? The one exception might be like if you're intentionally embracing cliche. There's some genres where this can be, you can do this in an apt way, or maybe you start with a cliche, but then you put a twist on it. And right, that's different, but avoid just cliche on its own. However, cliche can be a good starting point for writing a blurb. If you start with a cliche and then you build on that and then change it. Right? It can be a good building block, a sort of a placeholder to put there to then build on as you change your blurb and make it your own. So you don't want to end up with cliche at the end, but starting with it, right? If you're just whip out a blank piece of paper and start writing your blurb, yeah, you can start with a cliche, maybe a few lines of cliche in a row even, and then change it and edit that and make it new and change it as you're going along, right? So don't feel like you can't start there, but you don't want to end there. You do not want to let them off the hook. If you fail to hook the reader, why are they going to read the blurb? They're not going to read your book. The hook is probably the most important part, but then you have to fulfill that hook later on in the blurb, right? So if your hook initially is really good and then you info dump, or your hook is really good and then your blurb just kind of isn't compelling at the end and you don't have that call to adventure, right? You've let them off the hook, right? They took the bait and they're gone, right? And your buddies are never going to know how big that fish was, right? So keep them on the hook by following through the rest of your blurb. And don't avoid, or I'm rephrasing this as a common blurb pitfall. Ignoring genre conventions is another one. You need to lean on the expectations of your genre rather than defying them in most cases. I recommend you research other authors in your genre for examples of like what's typical. But I would generally say avoid all the big names, right? The household names that everybody knows about. If you write, like horror, for example, I wouldn't necessarily look at Stephen King to be your first example. Look at somebody who is still very successful, right? Their books sell really well, but they're not as well known. And don't just go to those big names. I mean, maybe you can definitely put, have them in the mix there, but don't just look at those big names and then copy them, because there also has to be some element of novelty a little bit, or there it doesn't have to be, but it is good if you can have some element of novelty that at the same time doesn't break the genre expectations in your blurb, so that your blurb like stands out. It's unique and it's different and it's attention getting, but it doesn't conflict with the conventions and expectations of your genre. So let's talk about book descriptions now, because a book description is something entirely different. I know I mentioned, right? A full book description is doing a different job than what your blurb is. And we've talked about blurbs, for a while here. So obviously you want to have a concise and clear description. You want to keep it focused on the protagonist, the conflict, the stakes, and just 2 to 3 short paragraphs. Your blurb is a little bit shorter than that. Remember, about 200 words. Some of them can be, more than one paragraph, I would say. Sometimes your blurb and your description might even be close to the same length if you can be concise and clear enough in your book description. But we're going into a little bit more detail here, right? So we're introducing the main character, we're highlighting their key traits. The goal is to, again, create an emotional connection with the reader. But we're typically phrasing this in a different way. This isn't the elevator pitch, right? The elevator pitch gets their attention, and then they might go on to the book description to find out a little bit more detail. You can put more detail in your book description than you generally can in a blurb. So you want to give just enough world building to establish the setting, but focus more on what's at stake for your protagonist. Readers are going to care about what could be gained or lost, more than all these intricate details in your plot. But you have the opportunity here now to you don't have to be as compelling necessarily. You can be a little bit more factual, and you want to, again, avoid overloading with details. So again, focus on the main conflict. I say the big difference here, if we're looking at a blurb, it is your elevator pitch. We want to keep it short and sweet. The book description can break some of the rules of a blurb. You can talk a little bit more about some of the other characters. You can talk a little bit more about the setting, perhaps. You can even use your book description to talk about to reference the book itself, right? Not something that you would typically do in the blurb, right? Book title is a coming of age epic fantasy adventure that, right? You can include elements of that in the description of your book. Even references to the author are sometimes included in the book description. Depends on how strictly you want to define this here, but these are really two different things. And the way I want you to think about it is to go back to that elevator pitch. If you were going to tell somebody what your book was about, that is your blurb. If you wanted somebody to read more of a summary of what your book is about, that is more of a book description. You can imagine you probably wouldn't want to just verbally tell somebody an entire summary of your book from start to finish, or a summary of the plot, right? Even without spoilers, a book description goes more in that direction. It's more of a summary. So taglines. Taglines are more closely related to a blurb. And in fact, your blurb can contain a tagline. That hook can be a tagline. It's a short, catchy phrase that's going to summarize your book's core appeal. In space, no one can hear you scream, right? One of my favorite movies, right? Or one ring to rule them all. I'm using examples that everybody should be familiar with here. These are taglines. These can be elements of your blurb that you can then pull out and use separately, right? So a tagline is even shorter than a blurb. It's like if you had only one sentence, that's your tagline. But they are really kind of aiming at the same goal and trying to accomplish the same thing. So again, short and sweet. It needs to be impactful, reflect the book's tone, vivid language, all the stuff that you've heard before. We want to hint at the conflict, right? I'm sounding like a broken record here on purpose, right? Right. A lot of this, we're doing the same thing, just in a few different ways. It's the same thing, kind of packaged differently. Right? And how you use a tagline is different than how you might use a blurb. Right? A tagline can work on a book cover. It can work well in ads or on social media. It can work well in a lot of different contexts because it's short and you can put it in a lot of different places, right? Where your blurb might not fit. Your blurb might be too large, and they become even more effective when you pair them then with a longer blurb or book description, right? If you're on, I mean, how many times have you been on perhaps somebody's Amazon page for their book, and you see like they've got a bold sentence at the top, and then it goes into kind of a blurb, or maybe it goes right into the description, whatever it happens to be, right? That tagline there is essentially taking the hook and setting it out separately on its own, but it doesn't always have to be a hook per se. You could try it that way, or you could try to be more of, you could focus more on the tone, or indicating genre. You could maybe focus specifically on one thing. If there's a particular weak point to your blurb or your description, this is another way that you can use a tagline to then, after the fact, come back and sort of change the tone. If you have a description, you go through your description, you get some feedback, or you crafted your blurb and you get some feedback, and somebody's like, I can't really tell what the genre is here, or maybe I don't understand what the stakes are for the character. That's where you can then craft a tagline specifically to come back and then reframe that. So you may want to wait and do your tagline at the end. Write your book description first, maybe, because it's honestly, it's a little bit more boring, right? And it's going to give you a structure and framework to build off of. Your book description is going to be factual. You're going to talk about the plot. You're going to talk about the characters. You can include a little bit more information, so you can kind of put everything in there and then pull some things out. And then from that, craft your blurb, craft the elevator pitch for your book, and then your tagline. A tagline is much harder to execute than a blurb, and a blurb than a book description, because again, the job that a tagline has to do it all on its own. Has a lot more heavy lifting to do than a book description. If you have several paragraphs to describe your book versus a few, maybe a few short sentences versus just a short phrase, right? You see how you have a lot more heavy lifting to do on that end. So start with the description and then build from there is what I recommend. Now, when it comes to getting feedback on your blurb, this could apply to your book description. This could apply to your tagline as well. Right? It's not exclusive to simply one of them. A/B testing is the first thing that comes to mind for me. So you want to create two different versions of your blurb or book description or tagline, and you want to drive traffic to them, right, somehow. You could do this with ads if you wanted to, but you don't exclusively have to do it with ads. You could do A/B testing with your mailing list. You have your obviously the readers on your mailing list read your books. They are your readers, so in some sense, they might be a little biased, right? They're on your mailing list for a reason, you would think, but they're most likely readers of your particular genre. And so their reactions to your blurb, your book description, or a tagline, excuse me, are going to reflect the behavior of readers who read within your genre. So you can use them as well. It doesn't just have to be A/B testing with advertising or something like that. Right? You could use your BookFunnel landing pages in this way, right? Because you have your tagline, you have your description, your blurb on your landing page, and maybe you have your book in two different promos that for all other by all other metrics are essentially the same, but you are using two different pages with two different descriptions, and you can see, okay, this one got more downloads than the other one did, or more claims, whatever it happens to be, right? There it is. And again, here, like I mentioned, you want to keep all other factors the same when you're doing A/B testing. This is just A/B testing in general to ensure that you have a true experiment going on. Keep everything else the same. Use the same cover. Use this if you're using a landing page. Use the same layout. Maybe you would use the same tagline if you're testing the description, and keep that the same. Change only one thing when you're A/B testing, right? If you're sending out your newsletter, and you're doing A/B testing in that way, so half of your subscribers are getting one version and the other are getting another, only change one element of that so that you can actually see the results. Because if there's too many compounding variables, you don't actually know what made the difference. And then once you have a winner, you can either then perform another A/B test. That's how A/B testing generally works. You can go again, or you can just settle on the result that you got and go with the winner. Totally fine. You don't have to do like multiple layers of A/B testing all the time. You can just do it once and then maybe give it some time and come back and try it again later when you feel you need to. But you do need to get feedback as well, direct feedback. So sharing your blurb with your readers directly and asking them what they think is most appealing. Maybe showing them a few examples. This is, again, another reason why it's great to have a newsletter. Ask them for their opinion. Here's two different versions of my book description. Which one do you like best? Right? Something like that. All right, so that can be very, very impactful. They can give you, there's going to be plenty, I'm sure they'll be happy to share their opinions with you if you ask them, right? If you have a critique partner or someone whose opinion you trust, maybe somebody that you know who's, maybe marketing savvy or that sort of thing, obviously you can ask them to take a look. But another great resource for you is to ask the opinions of other authors in author groups. Things like we have, for example, the BookFunnel authors only group. There's lots of other Facebook authors groups out there. You can put your blurb out there, put your book description or tagline out there, ask for feedback, and get insight from your fellow peers. The big thing here is that a lot of those folks have also had to write their own book descriptions and blurbs before. And so you're actually benefiting from any research they have done, any testing they have done. They're going to give you insights that your readers can't give you, and vice versa, right? Your readers are going to have some insight that your other authors might not, but they're going to have insight on that as well. They've had to do the very same thing, presumably. After you've done this, you need to analyze and adapt. So keep track of when you make changes to your blurb or your book description, right, on Amazon or what have you, and any taglines or any changes that you make, right, so that you can then see if anything changes after you have made those changes, right? If relevant stats change, sales, downloads, etc., clicks, maybe if you're talking about an ad, if you're changing the copy on an ad, right? You would see changes in that. Keep track of when you make those changes so you know when it happened. And it can be as simple as just keeping a log somewhere, even just in a Word document. And maybe you do this if you keep your descriptions and blurbs in a document of its own, put a date on it. And then when you update it, go back to that same document, and your next one should be just on the next page. So you kind of see a history of when you updated and made changes to your blurb, so you can see how much of an impact it had. Maybe you change it and nothing really changes. It didn't make that much of a difference. There might be other factors at play. Your blurb may or may not be right the biggest factor in that regard. Or maybe you see a dramatic difference, positive or negative. Knowing when that happened is really important to be able to track those changes. Be patient after you make a change like this, though, before you go back and tinker it again. It can be very tempting if you're especially if you're in the mood to play with your book description, to you change it once and then you go back and oh, well, I want to tinker with that again. As long as it's up to standard, leave it for a while, let it sit, let it simmer, and see what happens. I would avoid going back and changing it too frequently and tinkering with it too much, because you run the risk of kind of confounding any data that you might get out of it, and you don't know what was really working. And then understand that you're going to have to adapt to different platforms. Your book is going to appear differently on Amazon than it will on other sales platforms. You're on different landing pages, in different formats. Some things are going to be stronger. So for example, if you're running ads, you have to grab attention in multiple ways. But really, there's a strong visual element, and that's not really part of your blurb or description, but you have to understand that there's a very strong visual element to get somebody to stop and pay attention to your ad, and then they get to the hook. Whereas if somebody's on Amazon already browsing, they're like, oh yeah, book cover, yeah. Oh, that book cover is interesting, but right, they're in a different state of mind, and you you don't necessarily, the image doesn't have to do as much heavy lifting as it actually does in an ad. And in fact, in that context, your blurb, your hook, your tagline, whatever it happens to be, that's there first, the first text that they see has to do that job for them, or for your book, rather. So understand that you can't just copy and paste and do the same thing on each platform and expect the same results. It is going to vary from one to the other. And this could be different platforms where you have your book for sale. This could be social media. This could be ads that you're running, your BookFunnel landing pages, right? Wherever you happen to be putting them. Right? So understand that sometimes it's going to be best for you to approach it in a different way. And maybe it's more about how you arrange those elements. Maybe in some contexts, it works really well and your tagline is first, and then you follow that with your blurb. Or maybe you find that your blurb does the job better in another context. Or in some cases, it's just your book description, and that's all you need, right? You're going to have to kind of make some of those decisions a little bit yourself, and then again, test the results and see how it goes. All right. Let's get to some questions here. I need to find, there's Emma. And now I need to find Kelly. I see the chat is booming.
Off the chain. Yes.
Yeah. I am sure that we've got let's see, there's somebody else that wants in here. Where? Oh, maybe I'm scrolling. Kelly, are you able to unmute yourself? I don't, maybe you're not. Kelly, where'd you go? Oh, there you are. Awesome. Okay.
She says no.
I
Okay.
forgot to pin both of you here at the very beginning, which would have helped. All right. So I figure we'll go through a few questions here, and then we will that are in the Zoom chat. So, folks, if you haven't yet put your questions in the Zoom chat, you can do so now. And then we will also take some time to go over blurbs and things like that. If you want to share yours. So I do see a couple folks who have their hands raised. So if you guys did ask a question in the Zoom chat, or maybe you haven't yet, go ahead and put that in there now. We'll try to prioritize if you do have. So I see Hyacinth and Manuel have their hands raised there. So Emma, Kelly, if you can, I don't know if you can locate their questions in there and pull those out first, that would be fine. I don't have a problem with that. But who Kelly, Emma, who's got one here ready to go?
Okay, well, Manuel or Manny actually has the first question already.
Sure.
So his question is, any thoughts on blurbs for poetry books?
Ooh, ooh, poetry. Oh, that's good. That's a good question. So, uh, yes, yes, no, and this is why we take questions because now I've got now the cogs are turning. I like this. So I think first and foremost, I think the feel that you communicate to the reader is going to be the most important. I don't write poetry myself, so I can't say this from personal experience, but I imagine uh, you you want to communicate to them because you don't have a lot of the other like elements to lean on, like plot and characters necessarily. Uh, you don't have a lot of those other things to lean on. There's a little, there's a structure there, I imagine, but I imagine it's a little more. I don't want this to sound disparaging, but it's simpler, right? It's more foundational, it's fundamental. Right. So I think conveying the feel of your poetry, right? What emotions are you trying to evoke in that context? That to me, I think it's a tall order, number one, because yeah, that's tough. Uh, but anything that can convey the emotion that you want them to feel, because I imagine that your poetry is designed to elicit some kind of thoughtfulness or feeling in them. That would be what I would lean on. That would be where I would start. And perhaps it goes back to kind of what I said about hard science fiction, where the science is the character. You may not have a character in a poetry book explicitly, but abstractly, you might, right? And it might be one of those things where again, or you can treat the reader as the character in your blurb. What are they going to experience? What is it they are feeling now? And how are they going to feel when they have read the book? I think those are the questions that I would be asking myself and then building from there. I think you have to really lean on that emotional element, uh, whatever the emotion happens to be, because poetry can be designed to, again, can be thoughtful, can be uplifting. There's lots of ways to approach it. So that's that's my thoughts. That's a good one. I appreciate that, Manny. That's you definitely you know yeah, that is one that I had. I'll admit I don't come to the table with all of the answers, and I don't always like I get surprised by these questions sometimes, and this is a good one. I really appreciate this because yeah, poetry isn't a genre that always comes to mind first for me. Yeah, that's what I would say is focus on the emotion, focus on how it's going to impact them. So I do see that I was tagged here in a comment. I think this probably was at the point where I said I was old. Shihan Sheriff, you are still young. Yes, I know. I am very aware of that, and I do my best not to take it for granted. But I was younger 10 years ago. That is absolutely true. That's indisputable. Anyway, okay. Who do we have next?
We have An excellent question from Brigida. I hope that's how you say your name. I'm sorry if it's not. But within a hook, is it best to screen your words for the purpose of using it in an ad? And she does not specify which ad platform. But for example, what if her tagline is, what if there was a cure for cancer? Who would kill to keep it quiet? Will the word kill present a problem?
Ah, yes. Okay. I have some direct personal experience with this. Um, because I write science fiction, and it's not always it's occasionally irreverent, and yeah, you can run into trouble with certain taglines that cross certain lines or use certain words. So really, though, I think the solution to this is to have multiple taglines, write more than one, and uh, try to that that you might have a tagline that you use in ads and in other contexts where you're not as the wording that you use isn't going to be scrutinized. You can use words that are going to be more attention getting, because yeah, kill in that context is a very evocative word, but obviously certain platforms might not always want you to use that. What is it? The kids nowadays on social media, instead of saying the word kill, they say unalive. Maybe you could just use the word unalive instead. No, I'm kidding. I'm kidding. My suggestion would be to write multiple taglines, and that's something you should probably do anyway, is have multiple taglines, and then you have one that works on that platform, where certain verbiage isn't allowed, right? And sometimes that verbiage is really attention getting, and so that's why it would be useful. I totally get that, but so I don't think that it's entirely inappropriate. I'm not judging you if you chose to use that. But yeah, certain platforms won't allow it, so you do have to. Yes, unembody. I like that one. That's the
Yeah.
winner right there. That's the
Yeah,
winner.
it really does depend, because I think in Amazon they don't care if you put that as your tagline in your
Yeah.
blurb and whatever, but Facebook, you may run into some issues with Facebook, and definitely if you did a TikTok ad or a TikTok anything with the word kill or murder or
And this one, this isn't going to be relevant to everybody, and I feel a little bit so things like cursing. If you write with cursing in your book, it's probably actually a good idea to signal that as soon as possible so that readers who don't like it can steer away, right? So sometimes you might be tempted to use that in your blurb or tagline, which I think is totally fine if that's as a strategy, because you're weeding out the readers that don't like that stuff, and it's very attention getting. It can be gimmicky, so don't overuse it and don't be brash with it. But yeah,
didn't you
essentially, yeah, that's the kind of thing you couldn't use on an ad platform like Facebook.
didn't you try that once? Didn't you put out an ad that had
Next question. Let's see.
thought that was something you had
I
done.
did. I
And
did.
I don't think
I
it
did.
lasted long.
It was extremely effective, though. And it was in the image. It was the most effective ad image I have ever used. And it only lasted for less than 48 hours. And I cried myself to sleep. It was, if you want to find out what it was, you'll have to come see me in person at Author Nation. It was great, but it works because of my writing style and yeah, because believe it or not, even though here in these webinars I'm very professional, in my writing is a different story, and so I was trying to communicate to a specific audience, and it worked really effectively, but Facebook wasn't having it, so.
Okay. And Kelly knows all. Yeah, I'm just spilling the beans on Jack.
Okay, yeah, yeah. Mm, mm.
Okay.
I know
Gwen Taylor.
we have some more hands. Oh, go ahead. I think you were getting to one, so you mentioned.
Yeah, Gwen is asking, is there some sort of document with the same info that you're speaking of, just because they can't retain all the information,
Yeah.
please? Maybe, I don't know, maybe the slides or something
Yeah,
you can
I can
share?
make a PDF and I can create a link for it. What I'll do is, where is the best place to put that? Because I can probably put that. I can put it in the email that you guys will get with the replay link, but I might forget that it's there and then not go back to edit it. And then the next webinar will have a PDF for slides for a totally different webinar, and that could be confusing. So I think what I might do is actually put that in the Facebook group. Is probably the best place for me to put that, is what I imagine. Um, so yes, Gwen, if you are in the Facebook group already, I will put it there. I will, and yes, and I will use a BookFunnel. I think you're asking. I'll use a BookFunnel page. It'll be a BookFunnel download link, but I'll put that link in the Facebook group. I think, see, there's some folks asking about the link to the Facebook group. I think Emma, are you able to drop that in there real quick?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, awesome.
Grab it.
And I know we have some folks who do have their hands raised here. I think Candace has a question. She's got her hand raised. I'm not sure if either of you have found her question in there.
Didn't see a question. Let me look through.
Okay. And Candace, if you
Mm,
want to drop it in the Zoom chat as well, we can.
It was pretty busy, Candace, so sorry
Yeah,
if we missed you.
there are a lot of people going back and forth in there, but I'll give you a moment here to put that in the chat. No worries. But yeah, so I think what Emma just dropped there is links to, she dropped all the links. So YouTube and all that stuff. And the Facebook group we actually have two Facebook groups. So there's a BookFunnel promos group, and there's a regular Facebook group, an author's Facebook group. That's where more of the discussions have happened. So it looks like Candace wanted to have her blurb reviewed. So by all means, Candace, if you want to, you can drop it in the comments here. That's totally fine. We can take a look at it and give you
Okay.
some feedback here.
Good on there. Okay, so just to kind of hit a couple other questions we had before we get to the blurbs, if that's
Sure.
okay.
Yep.
EB was asking, I've seen mixed opinions on likening your book to others inside of your blurb. Some call it lazy, others say it's effective and it sells. What's your perspective, Jack?
Uh, yeah, I think it's both. I think it's both. Uh, um, just to be tongue in cheek, right? To give a quick answer. Is it lazy? Sure. You could call it lazy. Maybe efficient is the word to use. I use the word efficient. But can it be effective? Absolutely. It can absolutely be effective. I've tried it myself, and it can, in certain contexts, it can actually work pretty well. Especially if what you are comparing your book to is something a little bit more niche. So if you're like, oh, this is, like Lord of the Rings meets some other really well-known book, probably not as effective because, yeah, sure, it's like Lord of the Rings, right? But if you're comparing it to inspired by the Chronicles of the Black Company by Glenn Cook, how many of you know who Glenn Cook is? Right? You may not. One of my favorite authors. But the readers who also know who Glenn Cook is and really love, I'm sure plenty of people have. He is a big name. Many of you should have heard of him, but not as immediately well known, right? As say like George R.R. Martin, right? Just on the face of it. So it's a little bit more niche. So that's where I think it's most effective. If you're going to compare your book to one or two really well-known things, it's going to be less effective, right? It was like Star Wars and Star Trek, right? The one I've seen before, it's like, yeah, it's like Star Wars and Star Trek had a baby. I would avoid that one specifically, the baby part. But Yeah, those two franchises are so popular and so well known that it's like, what does that really mean? Right? If you're going to do that, try to niche down and be more specific about what you're comparing, especially if your book is really a good match for that audience. So my science fiction is directly inspired by the reboot of Battlestar Galactica, which is very controversial. But I was at a certain age when that show was on. It inspired me, right? And so I use that one from time to time because it's actually effective, because there's a core group of fans around Battlestar Galactica, specifically the reboot, right? And so in that sense, it's something that I've used and found it effective. Is it lazy? Sure. Right, right. It can be done lazily, I think. Uh, it's a relatively simple thing to do, but I think if you're leaning on that on its own, it's not going to be as effective. You can't just do that and expect it to work. Let's see. We've got some blurbs getting dropped in here, which is great. We can get to some of these here. I know. Let's see. Okay, actually, Ron, thank you. Looks like he mentioned it here that Candace's blurb is actually, he gave the timestamp for it in the chat at 9:11 a.m. I'm assuming that's probably 11:11 for me in my time zone. Let me scroll through here and find it. There we go. Okay. So Candace, here is your blurb. I'm gonna read it here if that's all right with you. So Tilly Buchanan is not like those floofy girls in town. Marriage doesn't interest her, and neither do most of the men she knows. All she's ever wanted to do is manage Buchanan Hollow, the ranch she runs because her pops is too lazy to care. Or so she thought. Because her father just hired a dad-blasted city slicker who has no place on a ranch. If it's the last thing she does, she's going to get rid of him. The fact that the stranger is darkly handsome and mysterious is irrelevant. I like that. When Dr. Eli Knight is called in to save the life of a gangster's dying son, he never expects that he'll end up fleeing for his life to Texas, of all places. He certainly never imagined he'd end up working for Tilly Buchanan, the orneriest woman in Texas. But ornery or not, he finds her ambition, her intelligence, and the freckles on her nose fascinating. But even more fascinating is what Tilly does when her father announces she has 60 days to get married or she loses the ranch. I am intrigued. I am intrigued. You've done a good job of setting the stage, setting, especially there at the end, uh, because obviously there's that reframes the whole thing. And so you started off here with I'd say initially the hook maybe could be a little bit stronger. You're going right in and referencing the main character, right? Tilly Buchanan is not like those floofy girls in town, right? Marriage doesn't interest her, all that sort of thing. I think the real hook, the hook might be buried a little bit, is managing the ranch, right? That element of it, to me, and this is just my opinion, feels more like the hook. And so it's buried there a little bit deeper, because, and then it comes full circle at the very end where you've hinted at well, you've essentially revealed the conflict. She has 60 days to get married. And you are referencing back to the fact that, her feelings on marriage and that sort of thing. So that is relevant. I think the only thing is that the hook could be a little bit sharper right there at the beginning. But I like it, especially, and this is something that I think does well in romance. You'll have to tell me if I'm wrong here, because I'm not a romance reader or a romance writer. But I think this is kind of a common thing where you take the two primary characters, typically the main character and the love interest, and you contrast from their two perspectives. And so I think that's effectively done here. Overall, I like it. Kelly, Emma, do you guys have thoughts? Want to weigh in on that? being the romance experts, our in-house romance experts, right?
Um, I dropped a question in chat. Who's the target audience with the tagline?
Yeah.
Um, the tagline evokes some strong emotions in me, not like other floofy girls. So you may want to get some feedback and revisit that.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. And I think there's a lot that's in there that maybe it's like maybe on the wordier side, where it's, neither doom. I went back to 9/11. Thanks for dropping that in there so I could read it.
Yeah.
There's a lot of information that's being given that maybe isn't necessarily something that when you're scrolling through Amazon, maybe that isn't there's just a lot of information that's in there, and maybe it could be kind of tweaked down just a little bit to remove some of those um, extra pieces of information, like all she's ever wanted to do is manage the ranch because her pops is too lazy to care. So like that's a lot of information that maybe could be conveyed a little differently,
Yeah.
or maybe cut down. Just some trimming, I think, is something you might want to think about.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I would agree. I think that it was, as far as blurbs go, it's probably on the longer. I obviously don't know how many words it was, right? My suggestion is 200 words or less. So I think there's some things that you can definitely make more concise. However, you did do a good job, especially there at the end, creating some conflict. I think that's really the strong aspects of it. I would try to pare it down a little bit, make it a little leaner, and then really focus on that hook. And I think, like Emma said, who's the target audience? It's not me, right? Right, you're gonna want to probably find your target audience, probably your subscribers, your newsletter or something like that, other readers in your genre, and get their opinions on it, see what they think. Because right, this is the thing. There's coded language too for different genres. And so that readers are familiar with, and so you want to know in some cases what verbiage you're using and what you're evoking with your word choice. And I think it is important to convey to readers what they're going to expect, and your word choices can sometimes backfire if you choose the wrong words, but it should really serve to turn off the wrong readers who shouldn't be reading your book, and generate interest in the readers who should be. All right. Moving along, I imagine we have some other blurbs to uh to get looked at here. I think I see Patsy and Antonia have their hands raised. Emma and Kelly, I'm not sure if you're able to find theirs or not,
Let's take
or
a
their questions.
look.
But Patsy and Antonia, if you have a question or your blurb, if you just want to drop it
Yeah, if you
again.
just drop the blurb again, because I'm trying to scroll. Patsy.
Ah,
Okay. There we go. Thank you,
all
Patsy.
right. Kelly, do you want to take this one? You want to read this one?
Okay. All right. Two murders, a whole party of suspects wearing disguises, hundreds of questions in a seaside village full of cake. Hmm. Community spirit is strong in Little Mallow, and everyone seems to be involved, either as one of many witnesses and suspects, an extremely unofficial sidekick, or a supplier of far-fetched theories. But there's only one student police officer, Crystal Claire, uh, to make sense of it all. It doesn't help that Crystal is the only person who thinks the crimes are, it keeps jumping on me. Oh no, I lost it. There we go. The crimes are linked. All of the main suspects have alibis, and Crystal isn't excused cake baking duties. She's being asked questions by everyone from precocious schoolboy Adam to Arnold the enigmatic verger, and nobody is giving her answers. Then there's Crystal's crush on the DI, a sergeant's crush on her, and an unfinished business with her former neighbor. Oh, and great Aunt Agnes, Agnes's hip and friend Ellie's romantic problems. Can Crystal bring love and justice to Little Mallow? And for reference, the author is British, Patsy's British, in case that
Yeah.
matters to that. Yeah, I was getting the same thing. It was like a cozy mystery vibe from that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm definitely getting those vibes. I think there's maybe a little info dumping going on here. There's a lot of characters that are mentioned outside of the main character, and some plot elements. There's the technique that you're using where you're listing, right? So you're starting off with 2 murders, a whole party of suspects, hundreds of questions, and a seaside village full of cake. Um, and then later on, you're kind of relying on some similar techniques where you're listing, right, these different elements of the story. And I think it can be effective, but I think if it's maybe you might want to switch tactics, especially in the second half here. Because so can she bring love and justice to Little Mallow? I think the part that really intrigues me is those first 2 words. Granted, I'm probably not your target audience, so take this with a grain of right. So but just looking at it here, like just from like the conflict and the tension, and there's all these other things circling around the main character, right? We've got all these other characters and so forth. And I think what's happening is that is distracting from the actual the most tension generating element here, which is those 2 murders. I think there is a little bit of wordiness, just to go back to that first sentence. For example, 2 murders, 2 murders. I would rephrase it a little bit. 2 murders, a party of suspects. You could say untold, hundreds of questions, or countless questions, and a seaside village
I
full of
really, I
this.
really actually for the cozy, if that is, and I haven't seen the new messages to see if that's what she's
Yeah.
going for, but the cozy mystery feel of it is you have 2 murders and then that sentence ends with a seaside village full of cake. I
Yes.
kind of love that little
No,
juxtaposition.
yeah.
So you're like, what is that? That's intriguing. Like, why is
Right.
there so much cake? I love it.
Right. No,
So I think
I agree with
that,
that. I think it's
yeah,
the a whole party of suspects wearing disguise.
yeah.
What
Trimming, I think. Yeah.
there's this thing that went viral on social media recently where somebody posted and they're like, you know, like 80% of editing is just shortening sentences, right? And somebody replies and shortens their sentence. 80% of editing is shortening sentences. I think that's something that could be helpful here. So 2 murders, a party of suspects, because wearing disguises and there's a whole party, it kind of distracts from that, right? If you really wanted to get nitpicky, you could say instead of hundreds of questions, you could say countless questions. It reduces the word count, but it communicates the same information. And I'm not trying to be overly nitpicky here. The juxtaposition of murders and cake is great though. That's and so if you remove some of the unnecessary words, that shines through. And then just don't lose, keep reminding us about like the murder element, the danger, what's at stakes, and maybe pull back a little bit on some of the details here. I think you've got a really good foundation though. I think this is a really great start.
And in general, what you can do with blurbs, because with a lot of newsletter vendors, they'll limit you to like 300 characters or 600 characters. Take your blurb and chop it down to the bare basics and see what you have left. And whenever I do that, I find that I have so much in the blurb that I don't really need to communicate right then and there to the reader. And then I wind up going with the shorter version. So
Yeah. Now, thanks for sharing, Patsy. And we've got a whole bunch of other hands raised here. We're going to try to get through as many as we can, folks. Uh, Apologies if we don't get to everybody. I think Antonia she had her hand raised up next. So if we
Okay.
did she drop it in there again? Let's
Is it
see.
again? Oh, yep, there it is.
Okay.
Yep, settled that one.
Emma, did you want to read this one? This is like, in high school where everybody takes a turn reading, right?
Yes. Antonia, right? Okay.
Tony, yep. It starts settled into a life that never felt like her own.
Settled into a life that never felt like her own, she rebels her way to the truth. In her early 30s, Antonia was well on her way to checking all the boxes of the life that was expected of her: a husband, a successful career, and a stunning apartment with views of the Brooklyn Bridge. But when the inevitable question of starting a family arises, the tension between society's expectations and her own values becomes impossible for Antonia to manage gracefully. As her marriage unravels under the weight of infidelity and she is stripped of her prestigious job, Antonia finds herself in search of authenticity beyond societal norms in a relentless pursuit of her true identity.
Okay, so it almost has a feel of like sort of a uh, I guess like a life like um I was thinking of like Under the Tuscan Sun sort of feel. Is it fiction or is it nonfiction?
I think she mentioned it's a memoir. So.
Yeah,
It's a
yeah.
memoir. Okay, that makes a lot of sense. Yeah, so it does. I love that also that just the same thing we were talking about with the cake and the murders. This and this you're talking about. Here's what your life looked like, and then this is how it is now, and how you have to strip away all of the things that you had, and then searching for authenticity. I love that part.
Mhm.
Um, let's see.
No,
Suppose I'm
I
in.
think it's it's not too overly bloated. There's just enough information here. We're right. There's some elements that are being mentioned, right? Things about career, the stunning apartment view of the Brooklyn Bridge and that sort of thing. I think there's just enough in there where it's not too distracting. Um,
Mhm.
I think
It keeps
there's
you focused on the
yes,
topic for sure. Yeah. Mm.
there's I feel like it's the turning point is that sentence where it says but when the inevitable question of starting a family arises. I feel like that could be delivered in a more there's a little wordiness there that I think it loses some of the oomph of the delivery there. Because right, I get what you're getting at, right? Because that, especially in the context of what this is about, that's like the turning point. uh I'm not feeling the full weight of it just from the wording in that sentence. That's my feeling there. Like that might be a part of it that you'll have to experiment with.
Yeah, the inevitable question of starting a family arises, um, and the tension of society's expectations and her own values becomes impossible for Antonia to manage gracefully. I do love the managing gracefully. I kind of like that wording. Um, and then, but it kind of seems like more of the actual twist or the change up after everything is as her marriage unravels. So I think maybe tweaking it a little to kind of bring that focus to things unraveling to that part of it.
Uh, uh,
Otherwise, I like it. I think I mean I would read it. I would
well,
read that.
and obviously here I'm not writing the memoir for you, so I don't know if this is like, true or not, but seemingly that's the cause of the marriage unraveling. And because there's so much packed into that tight space, it doesn't seem like cause and effect. It doesn't seem as dramatic. And so in some cases, you could say, um, Right, so we're a stunning apartment with views of the Brooklyn Bridge, but her marriage unravels as questions of starting a family and society's expect. Right, you could say it starts to unravel because of this, and you put those two things together. Right now, it's kind of you're putting your cause and effect, and sometimes it's better to actually flip that because the marriage unraveling is somebody who's been through that personally myself. That's really the compelling element. That's the human element. That's the pain right there is in that sentence. And you kind of it gets muddied down or diluted, if you will, with some of the other information in that sentence that comes right before it. So I
Yeah,
think you start with
totally.
the marriage unraveling and then give a few hints as to why, and then I think that'll make the middle portion of that a little bit more effective.
Right.
Emma, do you have something to share there? I
Oh
didn't
no,
mean.
just saying I agree with that. There's a lot you're throwing at me, and I've been in several of these situations. So I'm getting a lot of emotional feedback. And as a reader, I kind of want to focus on one or two things and then be given a hint of, the unfolding of everything else. But right now I'm like, what am I supposed to respond to emotionally? The starting a family, the tension of society's expectations, the infidelity, losing the job, the quest for authenticity and finding like all of those things are familiar, but it's like it's so much to throw at me in one.
Mhm,
So
mhm,
that you might want to focus on what emotional reactions or experiences you want the reader to focus on first, and then craft it around that. Because so much of this resonates, I mean, with so many of us. Um,
mhm.
it's just a matter of focusing on what do you want to hit me with first.
Right.
I think that's going to be a beautiful story.
So I think we have. Thank you, Antonia. Starters so as we move on here, I think we got time for one more. Um, I know there's tons of folks here who've been putting your blurbs in the comments here. I do want to follow up with some more of these. And so what I'm going to promise here, this webinar is going to get uploaded to YouTube. And it's really easy on YouTube for if you leave a comment there for me to actually reply to you there on YouTube with comments and even video, right? There on YouTube. So if you're okay with that, having your blurb being kind of in a public place, I would encourage you to do that. I'll be getting this webinar uploaded to YouTube. Oh, I'm hoping to do that here by the end of the afternoon. Should be able to. So you can just respond with your blurb, and we can then critique it that way. There might be a couple contexts where we could critique it as well. Just for the sake of time today, I can't get to everybody. I really wish that we could, but what we can do is if you leave there in a comment on YouTube, I can come back and respond with a video critique or just a critique in the comments there. You can also go to our, if you're not wanting to do it as publicly, right, which I totally get, I totally understand. Feel free to also go to our Facebook authors only group and get some input there from folks, and so forth. So I think that's what we'll have to do. We're going to have to probably do one more at this point, unless there's. I guess I also don't want to lose sight of any questions. So I don't know if there were more questions that came through or anything, or it's basically just people wanting to get feedback on their blurbs. Is that the majority of it?
We do have a few questions.
Okay, let's get to a few of those and then we can wrap it up with one last blurb.
It comes some blurbs. There's a lot of blurbs in the book. Okay. The most recent at 1:04 p.m. I'm trying to be fair. So we got some early questions, and
Yeah, no, I understand.
Hyacinth asks, "Can I use AI to assist me to write a blurb?"
Yes, you can. I would say that this is controversial. I would not have AI write the blurb for you. What I mean is, I would not be like, "Hey, ChatGPT, write a blurb for my book. Here's what it's about." Oh, cool, thanks. Here's my blurb now. I wouldn't just take that verbatim and use that as your blurb. But it can be a good honestly, I have used it for things like this before, and honestly, more often what I do is I'll be like, okay, here's what the book is about. Generate a couple examples of a blurb for me, and I'll get like one line that's like halfway decent, and then I'll take that and then change it, and I use it kind of as a foundation. So it can be helpful in that process of getting started, but I would not rely on it to write the whole blurb for you. Really, it's much the same as like if you were picking a friend's brain and asking them for like, how would you describe my book, right? That's not somebody who knows your book as well as you do somehow, right? And that can be helpful. Another element of it that is also kind of helpful, and I think is that you can actually upload documents to a lot of these AI chat bots. I know ChatGPT allows that, and it can read the document and then kind of generate some information based on that. So it can give you it can kind of help you do some of the foundational work, but again, I would not rely on it alone in order to create your description. So, and obviously you don't have to, right? It's not something that you have to do, but you can if you want to. It's uh, uh, no strong opinions here from me, one way or the other. I'm not going to tell you no, or yes, you should, you must, but rather if you do, keep this in mind, right?
Okay, so we had another question. So a blurb goes on short description spaces in Amazon, and the description goes on the back cover of the book or places that allow more than 140 to 200 spaces, I think means words. Is it better to only use the tagline on Facebook and Instagram?
Uh, it can be, uh, really, because in a lot of cases, it's all that somebody's going to read. However, that doesn't mean that you shouldn't include more, right? So like posting on Facebook, most of the time people have to like click read more. And so if your tagline is effective, they might continue to read more. So don't assume that they're not going to read anything, but start with your tagline in most cases, or a tagline, right? Something that's going to hook them and catch their attention. If you're using that specifically for an ad.
Okay. And then I think there's one question about your thoughts on a blurb for children's books.
Yeah.
They're already so short.
Right. And I think that's fine. I, I wouldn't get too self-conscious about the length of it, especially, when you're um in fact, you probably would want to keep it fairly short. It would stand out as odd to me, like if I was picking up a book for my kids and the blurb or the description was like really long and wordy, right? Right? Because unless it was like for my son is 10, so he's reading, chapter books and full-length novels, honestly, at this point. So that's a little different. But like for my 4-year-old or for my 18-month-old, yeah. Yeah, short and sweet. Short and sweet, I think would be the key. And again, not to be a broken record, but go back to like the emotion that you're conveying. What lesson is there to be learned, right? What is it that you're trying to, because oftentimes those are the tropes of children's books, that there's a lesson, there's some type of learning elements to it, right? Especially if you're talking about like social situations. So, and there's a lot of emotions in there, right? So I think the emotional elements matter. I think your parents are going to be reading this more likely than the kids. If you're writing children's books, right? If we're talking about young kids, the parents are going to be reading it. So also keep in mind that they might be your audience. Um, and then you're communicating to them why they would read this book to their kids, right? In most cases. Now, if we're not talking like for young children, but a little bit older, right? I think it's the same sort of thing, but simpler, right? If it's a chapter book, or you're talking, grade school age, then I think you can go with more of the conventional blurb, book description, but just keep it simpler. But it will really depend. Yeah. And Emma, you can go ahead. You can say that. You can just chime in. You don't have to leave it in the comments because that's actually a good point.
I'm a 5 and my youngest is 6, and we read our bedtime story from my Kindle device, and literally we're just scrolling. I just let her scroll the covers until she
Yeah.
finds the cover, and I read the title to her. And if she hears a keyword, usually some type of animal, she'll be like, "That one."
Yeah.
She
Yeah.
never read Blurbs.
And,
So
and yeah, so and that's why I think short and sweet is best. And yeah, in that case, you're right. Like, what is it that, if the parent did read the blurb though, aloud to the child, right? What would get the child to go, "Oh yeah, read that one," right? Is it if it were my daughter, is it about unicorns
yes.
or ponies? Is it like what's the content here, right? Are we talking about kittens? Right? Or babies, right? That sort of thing. Right? And I think those keywords probably lean heavily on keywords, lean heavily on emotion. Don't lose sight of the fact that the parent might be reading it. Like, what's the lesson to be learned? That sort of thing. But you can keep that short and sweet. Okay. I think do we have one more blurb that we can get to here, and then we'll wrap things up.
There's one posted from earlier from Emma in the
You
yeah, I can't
post
see it
you
right here.
posted your own blurb in
No,
the
no, no, Emma Young.
a different Emma. Yes, I know. I figured. I
Sure,
figured.
Emma's still in here. Is Emma still here?
I actually kind of love the tagline too. It's here, I'll post it so everybody can read it too. Um, is Emma still here? Oh,
I'm
it
not
posted
sure.
in bold. Why is it all in bold?
Oh, well, I can still read it. So it began with a magical library in flames. How will it end? Well, that depends on the book they saved. As a librarian, Lydia, whoa, it's jump. Okay. As a librarian, Lydia knows her chosen profession is fraught with danger.
Love that.
Okay, you did.
Oh,
That's
well,
good.
that
Uh,
depends. Book they saved is both so intriguing and tongue in cheek. Like,
yes. Yes, see some good humor here. This is good. When she discovers a book that could change the world forever, her elation is short-lived. Just minutes later, she's running for her life. When an ancient spell book tries to help, Lydia and apprentice Rose are catapulted through a rip in time, landing in 1841 amidst a community of powerful Victorian witches. Where there are witches, there are witch finders, and Silas Thorne has dedicated his life to eradicating magic in all its forms. While Lydia searches for a way home to 1960, desperate to get the Book of Prophecy to safety, Rose discovers that sometimes love can defy even time itself. Will Lydia and Rose change history or be lost to it? I really the opener there, the tagline, and then that first two or three sentence, the first paragraph there, really sharp. I think the final paragraphs, we get a little bit of there's a lot of information peppered in there. It's done fairly well, but we're mentioning two other characters here. We're making references to two different times, right? 1841 and Victorian witches, and then searches for a way home to 1960. So we're giving a multiple layers of information. So it might be a question of going through and seeing like what's really essential here. And I think talking about like 1841 and the Victorian witches is maybe a little bit more essential than knowing exactly what time period she's trying to make it back to if I had to make the choice. Um, but and then the title, The Book of Prophecy, I think is being mentioned a little late. That name is being dropped a little late. We're dropping more information. I would just refer to that book. If it's the spell book that you were referencing earlier on, I would just reference it the same way and not give the title, which is what you seem to be doing here in that case, or the title of the book that's it seems it's a blurb that mentions a book, so that makes it a little. I'm not talking about the book, unless that is the book title. Maybe it is. Might change that a little bit, but you're referencing the title of the book there. I would just refer to it as the Ancient Spell Book, or what have you again, as you did earlier.
I agree, Jack. It's kind of the same, and this is kind of the same feedback I had for Antonia. There's too much for me to focus on. So is the main conflict Silas Thorne, who is a witch hunter, a witch finder, and like, ooh, I like that, because I'm one of those girlies. Or wait a minute, is the conflict about getting the book of prophecy to safety? So you almost, with that final paragraph, take away from the emotional ping of Silas Thorne, because now I'm not sure what am I supposed to be connecting to. And then it doesn't really strike me as a romance until you get to the end, and I'm like, wait a minute, is this urban fantasy or romance? So again, we have a bit of very subtle genre confusion there.
Yeah, no, I would agree with that as well.
Well, and I had a hard time. Is Lydia the main protagonist? Is
Yeah.
Rose the main protagonist? And I think not knowing, like I thought Rose originally was a side character who got sent in through time as well, but she was going to be a side character, which then I would say maybe don't have her in there.
Oh yeah,
But then
no,
it sounds like she has the like a main part where it talks about love and defying time and all of that. So yeah, that part I'm not sure if maybe it's supposed to have two main storylines. I'm not
yeah.
sure.
It is kind of like a almost head hopping there a little bit, going from Lydia, who was introduced, to then Rose, because Rose is mentioned, and I think you could get away with that just if she's mentioned briefly. But then yeah, at the end there, it's she's referred to almost as though she's the main character, and that could be that just causes a little confusion there.
Yeah.
Even like I'm sure in the book, if it's a balance between those two characters, that's fine. But in the blurb, you kind of have to go with one and start there, and then you know um get people to read the book, and then they'll find that out. All right. Judy did say please, so we'll go ahead and read Judy's blurb. Uh um Emma or Kelly, you guys want to take this one? This will be the last one, folks. But yes, I know.
Jack, shop for blurbs.
What was that?
What was that?
You should do a whole workshop for blurbs, just like we should
You
do.
know,
It would be fun.
it will. I think this just seems like a really good just video on its own to do for the YouTube channel.
Mhm.
Uh it could just be fun for like the three of us to have people submit their blurbs, and we can just critique them. That could be like a regular segment on the YouTube channel even, I think that could be really interesting.
That'd be fun.
Yeah.
Okay, I'll read this one.
Go ahead.
Okay. Uh, he's stubborn, dominant, and opposite of everything I should desire. He's over twice my age, but there's something in his dark eyes that draws me in. At a high-profile marketing event, I find myself captivated by Elias Anderson. One stumble changed everything. And between me and my best friend's father, I'm struggling to resist this intense attraction. Every accidental touch ignites a fire within me, making it harder to stay away. In a heartbeat, I'm lost in his arms. After one night of raw passion, everything changes: my career, my friendship, and my life. Because now I have a shocking surprise. I'm pregnant. Okay.
That is a surprise there at the end. That'll do it.
They're hitting
Jack.
old tropes there, Judy.
Yep.
Like I mean, I read this type of book, so like you have told me, I don't even need to read the whole blurb. Stubborn, dominant, age gap, and then you have I'm pregnant in bold.
Mhm.
Then yeah, there's so many keywords in there that I can skim it and be like, okay, one click. So you
Yeah,
definitely have a strong sense of niche of who your target reader is. But
right.
I'm be biased because I am the target reader. So
What are the science fiction blurbs here, man? No,
Jack's like, sure.
No, I'm the minority, but I do have to say, no, that's absolutely true. It's very clearly signifying the niche and the genre. Um, and it's also going to signal to all the wrong readers, this is not your book. And that's good. That's what you want it to do. The only thing I do want to point out here, I think this is the first one that we've looked at that is in the first person. And sometimes that's a thing that people don't like. It can be effective. I think here it's actually done pretty well, but I do want to mention it because in some contexts it doesn't work as well. I think you've, especially with that, the last, the, the call to action at the end, which is right, the I'm pregnant line, you can't really deliver that effectively in the third person. And so I think the choice to use first person here is actually good, and I think it's done fairly well. But it's not, sometimes it's a good fit, sometimes it's not. I think for this genre it probably is easier to pull off than
Well,
it is.
no, probably first person present. It's a billionaire age gap.
Yeah, yeah,
Surprise.
yeah.
So
I would check. I think there was something that felt like a tense change to me. High profile event marketing. I find myself captivated by Elias Anderson. One stumble changed everything. So maybe it feels like it should be like changes everything. I'm struggling to resist this intense attraction. Every accidental. So it feels like there's a little tense changing. I don't know if it's just me. Maybe I'm just seeing it.
Oh no, I think that's there. I think it'd be worth looking at some of the wording and making sure you're keeping the tense consistent.
Yeah.
Because it's really that's the one pitfall of doing first person, is that it can be easy to lose that sense of tense, and that can change.
okay.
But
And I
overall,
nit because my emotional reaction to one click is out of the way. You do have some redundant lines there that I
mhm,
find
I was just gonna say that. Yeah.
the struggling to resist intense attraction. Those are kind of the same thing. I would focus on
mhm,
best friend's father, the unexpectedness, and then the accidental touch. Yeah, that's kind of redundant too.
mhm.
You
Yeah,
don't need all that because clearly we know what it's about. You don't need all that.
Well, and like one stumble changed everything between me and my best friend's father. I think what you're trying to, convey is my best friend's father. But then when we come down to after one night of raw passion, everything changes.
yeah,
That's that redundancy. It's saying
yeah.
the same thing again. Maybe there's a way to combine that.
Yeah, I no, I was seeing the same thing. Changed everything and everything changes. And then the listing there, my career, my friendship, my life. My best friend. There's lots of, like, if you just a word that gets repeated multiple times can sometimes just stand out to people. And so it might be worth looking at that. Because you could just list, my career, friendship, and life instead of having to repeat the my over and over again. Creative choices though, but
Yeah, because honestly, with this type of fantasy that you're selling, you don't need a lot because we get it. Like best friend's dad, he's baby daddy, hot attraction. Like that's yeah, 3 sentences, I'm good. Like Jack, Jack is
EB,
giggling.
what was that, Emma?
I said Jack is giggling.
Well, no, here, EB. Okay, mine is urban fantasy, Jack. You're tempting. Go ahead, go ahead. Dude, if you haven't dropped it, put it in here. I'm a sucker. You got me. You got me.
Gotta do one that isn't.
Not not even my kids you know are able to squeeze this much out of me. Let's see here. Let's see, can we
The
find it?
top. Let's see if we can.
Is it at the tippy top, or where are we at here?
All
Um,
right.
I've
The
got it.
third. Oh, you got it? Okay.
Got it. Okay, yeah, I'll go ahead and put it down here in the bottom, and we can take a look.
Um, oh, that's why he did it in 2 posts. Okay. First one of two and two of two. There we go.
Oh, okay. Okay, two different versions of a blurb. The book itself is written in the first person, present tense, and is an urban fantasy comedy mystery. Okay. So the original blurb: Heck hasn't slept in days. There's no telling if he'll dream or take a trip to the underworld, where weeks or even months pass in a single night, and every soul is unhappy to see him. He is a bridge between the living and the dead, a freelance necromancer. I like that, for a freelance necromancer, and aspiring influencer. Tonight, the sheriff calls Heck to crack open an empty coffin and 100-year-old conspiracy before a live audience. But it's a race against the clock as insomnia ravages him and he minds the monstrous depths of a century-old mystery. So just looking at this, I'm definitely, obviously, fantasy vibes here. You are dropping some of the, like he's an aspiring influencer along with being a freelance necromancer. Freelance necromancer, but that's the gem in there. That's really good. So you're dropping some, like, you're dropping some of those elements that show, okay, it's urban fantasy. I'm not exactly getting the comedy vibes from this, but who knows? You've revised it, so maybe that will come.
Yeah,
Uh,
the revised version has a stronger voice.
so I'm Heck McTire, necromancer and voluntary insomniac. Yeah, that got a giggle. It's been 60 hours since I slept, 4 since my last cup of coffee. I'm jittery as a crack addict raccoon with the sheriff when the sheriff hires me for a seance over an unmarked grave and sanctions a live unboxing. Oh, but instead of seeing me talk to a corpse, my audience watches me pry open an empty coffin and a 100-year-old mystery. It's a race against the clock as insomnia scrambles my brain like a morning fry up, and my hometown plots to bury me and its secret alike. This is the first part of a trilogy, an ongoing series wrapping up the main story, but leaving plot threads dangling for the future. Which is better, or are both crap? No, I don't think they're both crap at all. I think the second one is definitely much stronger. I'm definitely getting a feel for, like, your sense of humor. This is where I was talking before, how people read your blurb, they're going to get a sense for your writing. This is funny and makes me want to read it. Like, this right, I'm not even really an urban fantasy reader myself, but this sounds great, and it sounds really punchy, and so I think you're doing a very effective job of that. I think there's a little bit of clunky because the first person here again is, I think in the beginning you're executing it very well. When we start to transition to, like, but instead of seeing me talk to a corpse, my audience watches me pry open an empty coffin. I think that sentence could be cleaned up a little bit. Try to cut out some unnecessary words. I like what you're conveying, but it also feels like the main character is also trying to play the role of the narrator, and it's like that the main character's voice was much stronger in the beginning, right? I'm Heck McTire, necromancer, freelance necromancer. That's one change, and I do suggest, and voluntary insomniac. That there's a strong voice there, and then when you switch from that to kind of typical narrator speak, like, but instead of seeing me talk to a corpse, right? I'm even making the voice, right? It's a race against the clock. There's a cliche there. You could just cut that and say, you know, with an insomnia scrambled brain, like a morning fry up, uh, my hometown plots to bury me and its secrets alike, something like that. So the cliche there, and then just be careful about that you stay in that character's voice all the way throughout, is what I'd suggest.
Yep, I like it. It definitely conveys the comedy more than the first one did.
Mhm.
Actually brings that comedy to the forefront rather than it just being like, oh, this is kind of funny. Yeah, it actually brings it up to the front.
Yeah, no, it absolutely does, and it very effectively. And then just gotta stay the course. Yeah, the sardonic tone, absolutely. I guess I'm just gonna I'll speak Emma's lines for her. You're unmuted, Emma. You can just talk. I don't know what you're doing, but yeah, I'm jittery as a crack-addled raccoon. That right there is also signaling to your audience, right? And so that's verbiage that is going to turn some people off. And that's good because those people aren't your readers, and that's fine. And so sometimes you do have to be very like in your face. I like it. But yeah, he should say uh freelance necromancer and voluntary insomniac. That was the only thing from the first blurb that I felt was like missing. That's one element I think you should keep. So, all right, we are going to wrap it up there as far as going through blurbs and stuff, folks. Uh, there's a lot we didn't get to, I'm sure. What I will do, because there was a question about like the slides, that's going to go in the Facebook group. I will get that there. I'm going to make a note for myself. Excuse me. And then some of these other blurbs, I think what we'll do, because this seemed to be something that folks really appreciated, and I'm humbled that take our opinions for or value our opinions, I should say. I think what we'll do is create a submission form where folks can submit their blurb, and we will sit down, Emma, Kelly, and I, and we will do the same thing, not live, but we can record it and get some of that up on the YouTube channel. I think that could be fun. I think it could be really helpful for folks to get some input on their blurbs. I think it'd be really helpful even if you don't get your blurb, critiqued, still to watch it and kind of get some idea. Because even I'm like, oh yeah, I'm picking up on a few things here. So I think that could be fun for folks. So I will obviously have to mention that in the all over the place, but yeah. So Emma, Kelly, let's compare our schedules and book some stuff, right?
Yep.
But it'll be fun. Okay. Before we go, make sure if you are not already signed up for next week's webinar, we're going to be talking about ad copy for your Facebook ads. So there's going to be some overlap here. We're talking about blurbs, we're talking about taglines, all that stuff is relevant to Facebook ads, but we're going to be talking more specifically about like how do you get your copy to sell on Facebook, specifically how do you get them to click, how do you get them to follow through. And so that's what we're going to be focusing on there in that webinar. So please join us, especially if you like the first webinar on Facebook ads we did last month, your first Facebook ad. Also, check out the YouTube channel. We have some of our previous webinars up there already. Like I said, you can ask questions on YouTube, any of our YouTube videos in the comments. I will be the one responding to those. I respond in the comments, and I will also oftentimes, if you got a great question, I will respond to that question with a short video where I can explain in more detail some stuff rather than simply relying on typing up a full comment, something like that. So it actually does help me because it creates more content for the channel. And if I don't grow the channel, guys, they're gonna let me go. And okay, I'm not being serious here. But I'm just trying to create some tension and stakes here for you guys. No, but I would appreciate, it would mean a lot to me, and it would actually be helpful because we're wanting to get more content on the YouTube channel. We're wanting the YouTube channel to grow. And not even just for like selfish reasons. Like, of course, we want people to find out about BookFunnel on its face, absolutely. But we want it to be a resource for authors. It's not just going to simply be, this is why BookFunnel is great. So do you use BookFunnel? Why aren't you using BookFunnel yet? No, we want it to be really kind of like under the same mission of why we started these webinars, was to help authors feel confident in their self-publishing career, to educate, provide information, whether or not you use BookFunnel or not, right? To help you guys out. So that's what the YouTube channel is designed for as well. So I will leave it at that. But yeah, head on over to the YouTube channel, subscribe while you're there, and then leave comments and so forth. I'll make sure to drop some news about any potential like blurb critique videos or ways for you to submit them in the Facebook group. So also make sure you are a member of the group there too. But I think that that actually is going to do it for us today, folks. Thank you for joining us. I hope you have a great rest of your day, and we will see you all next time. Have a good one. Thank you for watching. Check out these other videos from BookFunnel, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel.